My name is Mike Reyes. I'm the president of Rhode Island New Technology, and welcome to Fireside Fridays. And today we're going to be talking about what's the diagnosis with somebody, a big titan in the space that I'm in the healthcare and blockchain space, Stephanie So. So Stephanie, you have a very interesting background with regards to blockchain and the healthcare space and blockchain industry and in general. And as we are basically looking at these legacy systems, right, they're increasingly more and more unreliable. So just give us a brief introduction about yourself and who you are in the space.
Great. Thanks, Mike. My name is Stephanie So.
Thanks.
I am the CEO and founder of a blockchain infrastructure company called Geeq. I actually was trained in social sciences. So I have an economics background, and my fields were health economics and disability policy. I really wanted to fix the medical care system and thought that was a little hard. So I took the values from that and the time that I spent hanging around hospitals and working on patient safety, watching people try to implement the electronic medical record, all of those issues that deal with huge amounts of data and patient outcomes and putting too much information and responsibility on providers to adopt the technology. And I kept that in my head for about 10 years. And now that I'm in blockchain, we have an ability to do something about all that. The ideas of patient safety, improving outcomes, making technology much easier and safer for people. That's what we're doing now.
So elaborate a bit more on Geeq's approach to blockchain as a new information and communicative technology.
Thanks. Yes, we are a different kind of blockchain in the sense that we're not focused on finance, DeFi, smart contracts, any of that. And what I think we really need is to resolve information and communication exchanges so that everybody gets on the same page quickly. And not only that, but that we don't get on the same page about fake information. Fake news and things that travel is a real problem these days, right, Mike?
You mean like the AI where basically, I mean, whether you like them or not, I'm not going to get political, but the AI where you had certain politicians being arrested and put in handcuffs, is that what you mean?
Well, AI is going to be a really big use case for Geeq in terms of checking how they do their work and what kind of data they've used and how they've come to conclusions, whether they've been discriminatory results or not. That's a place where checking what has been communicated and where it came from is a place for blockchain, our blockchain anyway.
Actually, that's interesting because I've never actually thought of blockchain. I think, I know blockchain for track and trace and records and all that kind of thing, but I never thought about it as helping disseminate between AI created fake news. I watched a TED talk once and there were 4 videos of former President George Bush speaking, and they're like, which one is fake? And
Wow.
they're all fake. I mean, the AI is getting really, really good at it, right?
Yes, they are.
Focusing on work that you said for the future. So what steps are you taking now to combat that right now? I want to see how that works. We're all giving you up your secret sauce for your startup, for your company, but rather what are you guys doing now to set the basis for that?
Can I back up and just explain a little bit about blockchain?
Definitely.
So blockchain is communicating from different sources. People send data in. They send it in some form that the blockchain can read. So that's messaging across networks. And then that's an input to a new kind of data structure that Geeq is building. And then somehow the messages are taken and they're filtered and they're validated, right? And you want that to be an unbiased process. So we bring information in, we make sure that it's validated and unbiased. And that's the benefit of automation, because people, if you have people processing all that data, they can get tired, they can introduce their biases, and that's something we can help with now with computers. And then after they take those transactions, they write them. So that's accounting, right? And then if something needs updating, like your meds records needs updating, then you put that update in the chain. And so it's just a very simple data process, but we haven't been able to do it before in an unbiased way that connects things back to where the data originated.
So just for AI, for not getting too off topic here. So just specifically for AI, what you're saying is that what we can do is we can have the ledger, right, as a block, that this is the accurate piece of information, correct?
We can say, for example, if you have training data and you scraped the web, we can say, this is where the data came from, right? These are the websites, or these are the sources that the data came from. That can be automated. And then you train your data, your algorithm for AI, and then something comes out. If regulators or somebody, consumers, companies, want to find out, well, how did you train your data? How much can I trust that data? And they find out that everything came from some social media platform that doesn't check, then that's a red flag, perhaps. Or maybe that's what they want, right?
So that's what they want. Okay, so what you're saying is that to a certain extent, you have to sell that your product is a place where people can get the accurate information from.
Exactly.
And if they get it from somewhere else, they might not be able to trust that information.
Right. Or the model, the training model. So this is great for science, potentially, if you can distinguish which models have been trained on data that the provenance, or the lineage of that data. And it comes from these researchers or these labs or these legitimate fact-checked places, rather than who knows where.
All right. So I've done a lot of research at different hospitals, and legacy systems are really, really bad. I actually went to one hospital where they were still using actual paper. They were like, yeah, it's too hard work to actually put it on a computer, so we have to look up these files, how we used to do it. Gen Z might not understand, but I'm a millennial, and you understand as well. When we were kids, look at the dictionary, look for the word apple, A-P, A-P-P. How do you get from where we are now on the current system, using a system like Geeq, right, that you're interested in, to getting people to adopt, hospitals, individuals, patients to adopt the blockchain in daily usage?
So, man, I saw a lot of complaints from physicians and nurses saying, I can't believe they want me to learn a new thing. Or paper is easier because if the system breaks, we have to go back to paper anyway. So there are behavioral issues that we have to take into account. The costs of adoption have to be lowered, right?
Behavioral issues. So you're going to somehow change people's minds to want to adopt this new technology?
Well, to the extent that we can show that it's valuable to them and the costs of adopting are really low, like maybe they don't even know that it's happening, in the sense that they trust their IT team.
Great, because for me personally, I've seen that for patients, at least, if you tell them, hey, you can have a QR code, you can have access to it 24/7, go to a new doctor, go to the emergency room, scan in. That's easy, right? Biopharma, big companies, pharmaceutical companies, if you tell them at least, hey, if we give you better quality data at a more inexpensive rate, will you try working with us? And they're going to be like, yeah, of course, better trials, clinical trials, more accurate clinical trials. But hospitals, especially different states, right? Because the state system in Massachusetts is different than the state system on Rhode Island, different than Nebraska. Well, I've traveled the whole country, right? Different in California.
Right.
So what are some incentives that you're thinking about for hospitals to want to adopt these new systems while lowering the costs, right, that you've already mentioned, for them to do so?
I'm glad you asked, because I have the answers.
Great. Don't worry, I'll be taking notes. You can charge me for the consulting fee later.
Yeah, okay. So what I worry about, and I think we really saw it in the pandemic, which is where I met a lot of the people who are in the Boston startup area. You have your daily life in the hospital already. You have cyber attacks and concerns about ransomware already, right? So these are already issues that are part of the fear landscape, let's say, the tech issues that people deal with. I saw a statistic from, I think it was IBM or Sophos, one of the cybersecurity reports that said 66% of hospitals get attacked by ransomware.
People don't know this, by the way. Just FYI, a lot of people don't know this, that a lot of their information is being compromised a lot.
A lot. They are. There's a new thing after ransomware called killware that's coming up, and there's ransomware as a service. It's horrible, and these are things that in your daily life, as you're trying to deliver care, you may not know about, but it really stuff hits the fan if your data get compromised. And that's the things we saw in the pandemic, right? A stressed system has their data go down. Surgeries have to be postponed because you don't know the most recent patient status. Labs had to be, right. So there's a lot riding on these information systems. And what Geeq is doing is saying, hey, we don't need you to use this on a daily basis as you're doing your patient data entry. But what we can do without bothering you is make sure that the most critical pieces of data that you need, not the whole thing, not the whole database, but the most critical pieces of data you need in case something happens, gets sent to the blockchain. Just like pushing an enter key, except it can be automated in the background. So for example, when you send data to the cloud, which everybody will do eventually, you will also send it at the same time to a blockchain. And those data can be encrypted, they can be protected according to HIPAA. We can do all kinds of things. It's just a new data structure, but it's something that can be recalled if your cloud goes down or if ransomware attacks the hospital. There's a separate set of data in the blockchain, and there you go. That really helps.
So I want to ask about something that you mentioned, HIPAA compliance.
Yeah.
In your view, what does HIPAA compliance mean? And how is this not infringing on people's HIPAA? You know, what HIPAA was meant to protect. How is it not infringing on people's individual patient rights is what I'm asking, putting it on the blockchain. Because this is something new. The blockchain didn't exist when in the 1980s when HIPAA was formed, right? So explain to me first, what is HIPAA compliance and how can blockchain be HIPAA compliant?
That's a good question. I kind of want to toss that back to you because you may, hey, I'm sure you've thought about this in a lot.
Oh, me? Okay. So the way I see it, a lawyer asked me, a friend of mine, Mike, what do you think about this? Kind of like, because he was like, well, I can answer the question for you, but at the end of the day, you're going to have to use this for what you're doing. So my understanding is this: HIPAA compliance was founded in the 1980s to prevent discrimination practices for people that with HIV, because, you know, there was a lot of stigma behind being homosexual, and it was staying out of the homosexual disease. Whether that's, I'm not saying it's incorrect or correct at the time, but that's what it was thought of. So people that, like if you watch the movie Philadelphia, he was discriminated against because of his disease, and not because he had the disease, because somebody else in the company had it, but they were heterosexual, but because he was gay.
Right.
And they found out he was gay, so they fired him, even though he was one of the top lawyers, and they had just given him the best case like of the company's history.
Wow.
So my understanding is, as long as you're not putting people's data in a situation where they can be discriminated against by employers specifically, you're protecting them, you know, from that, then you're HIPAA compliant. And I also believe it's different from state to state. So how does the blockchain protect people's data from being seen in a place where they can be discriminated against?
Okay, let me try to process that because I did not know. I know HIPAA came after, I think, the Health Insurance Portability Act, but I didn't know it was for discrimination specifically. I thought it was about access to the patient data, and the patient had the rights to know who was accessing their data.
Exactly.
A lot of people think that blockchain makes your data visible to everybody. And that's because in crypto, you have to have this accounting that I talked about. Do you have enough coins in your account, Bitcoin in your account to pay for a transaction, right? Do you have enough to do all those fancy financial things? And if somebody sends you some, will it be updated? You want both sides to be able to see that. So for finance in the public sphere, those transactions should be transparent.
Of course.
But if it's data that is no one else's business, really, there are all kinds of ways we can protect your data. We can still use permissioning. which hospitals use anyway, right? You have to, you've seen your doctor come in and then they swipe their card in order to get access, and then they have to type a password. And if blockchain is a data structure, we can implement permissioning in a private setting. So that's one. That's not scary. The second thing is we can encrypt. We can make sure that the data are encrypted end to end. That's something I'm not sure if all transactions or data rights in hospitals do that. They should. They probably should be upgrading.
They should.
They should. They really should.
You might be scaring some people right now. Sorry, but go ahead. Continue.
Yeah. And the third thing is that if you care, if the patient is concerned about discrimination, or if the patient wants their data, they always can track where their data is, what the data is, assuming we give them the decryption mechanism, right? Then the data are encrypted. Someone hacks in, they can see it, but they don't know what it is. But if you tell the patient, yes, we will give you a way to decrypt the data, that just means it gets translated back into plain text. And then I can read what I am. But I could only read it for me, right? If everything else is permissioned. So what blockchain does is it lets you, again, see the source. And then if you think about how the data got in, you can say, oh, it was this doctor. If they have any questions, they can figure out which doctor actually put it in, or which healthcare provider actually put it in, because that's what blockchain is for. It's for tracking the data and tracking where it's passed to another person. People talk about transferring NFT ownership. That's just data. So there's lots of protections. In fact, they're sort of, blockchain should imitate what people do anyway and help them.
For sure. Yeah. It should be invisible, right? So I have a couple questions on that. So hacking, you mentioned that legacy systems are constantly being hacked.
Yeah.
So for people that are watching this that don't understand how blockchain works, when you put information into a block, is it easy to hack it? The block itself and take the information out?
It is easier to corrupt the process of getting it in.
What does it mean, corrupt the process?
Imagine there's data coming in and you have a committee who is deciding what gets put in. So imagine that that's the way they check the data. Let's go back to the AI example. So let's suppose that all this data come in and we know that they're a mixture of data that's been fact-checked and data that's been scraped from the bottoms of the internet. And then who gets to decide what goes into the data? Well, maybe that's a committee that says, yeah, we really want the bad data, right? We want to make sure that everybody is taking the results from this AI algorithm that's based on this data that's politically biased.
Yeah. Sure. I understand that. I think most people get that.
I think most people understand that committees can have agendas. That's what I kind of mean by corrupt. So if you have that committee in the middle and it corrupts, or you had medical data coming in on a certain group of patients, and you have two groups of patients, the insured who can pay for anything, and including their privacy protection, and the other patients who don't know enough to advocate for their own privacy, for example, right? And it's decided about committee who gets into the blockchain first or who gets into which blockchain. That's what I mean by corruption. So back to your question.
The question was, just to reiterate, it's the fact that, okay, so we're deciding that we said corruption. If somebody puts in bad information, but once the block is closed,
then the bad information stays.
No, okay, once the block is closed and there's good information, can somebody go in there and either open the block and take the information out, the good information, or could they edit the information without my permission?
People can edit the information. Blockchains can be hacked. They also can be, in the blockchain world or crypto world, you'd call it forks. Very early in Bitcoin, there was a fork. People had to choose which kind of Bitcoin they wanted, Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin. Ethereum just did that. I mean, if you look up crypto and hack, those words come together all the time. right?
So Bitcoin itself has been hacked before. I'm not saying that the Bitcoin itself being like an actual Bitcoin, like an actual block of Bitcoin. If I own one Bitcoin, it can be hacked.
Bitcoin's the most secure of all the cryptos, in my opinion.
So why can't we just use that system in the healthcare space so that my information cannot be hacked? Sure, if the corrupted information goes in the block, yeah, I mean, sure, it is what it is, right? I have to be careful, or the doctors have to choose carefully what kind of doctor I go to, right? But once that information is in, why can't I just use a Bitcoin-like system to protect it?
It's expensive. It doesn't move at transaction speeds that you would need. And they really restrict the kinds of data, the volume of data per transaction. Because it's really just coins.
But sorry, you can do it with Ethereum though.
Ethereum has variable pricing. So sometimes it's expensive, but sometimes it's not. It depends on the traffic. That's problematic for an enterprise that just wants it to work all the time at some kind of predictable cost. You could use Ethereum. The other problem with Ethereum is that they have problems with volume and scaling.
So Stephanie, I'm sorry for interrupting, but is Geeq using Ethereum?
No, Geeq is its own. Geeq is its own way of doing it, because what we really care about is the non-corruption, the data integrity piece, the non-discrimination piece of the data just goes in an unbiased way. Wrong data is wrong data. Good data is good data, but all of it's in there to be evaluated, connected to the source. We have a protection that there will always be a true blockchain. And that's something that other people don't have, because they always have to agree on a blockchain or the fork. And so they can all agree on the wrong thing. We say, if you have a couple blockchains hacked, we can tell which ones those are. And there will always be a real one that exists that we can tell, or we can recover it.
That's great. It's a great answer. I think that's an amazing answer, believe it or not. So tokenization, Perpetuity had a few companies in there. There was one specific, Arrow Social. They're using Web 3.0 in their system, and they're using a tokenization system. So for healthcare specifically, going back to healthcare, do you see a future where not only are people sharing information, giving permission for certain medical institutions to see their data, healthcare data, edit it, but do you see a tokenization aspect to this system as well in the healthcare industry?
So my tiny brain said, wait, Mike, don't say edit, because edit in blockchain would be a hack, right? It would change the integrity of the data, but you can append. So you can say, whoops, that one was a mistake. Here's an update. I'm going to send a new transaction. I'm going to send a new message. I'm going to say, I cannot undo the fact that Mr. Smith was taking 10 milligrams of X drug on April 27th. But what I can do is I can say, now it's April 28th, and I can update his record to say he's taking 20 milligrams, right? So
thanks for letting me do that.
Not edit, but add. Do I see a place for tokenization? Most common case for tokenization, the dead easiest case for tokenization that people are chasing are loyalty points.
Like freaking flyer mile or something?
Like frequent flyer miles, yes. Everybody is chasing loyalty points. The travel industry is, entertainment. So that's easy to think about because a loyalty point is a loyalty point. When I worked at Vanderbilt, we had programs like, it was called Go for the Gold. And if you exercised at the gym, you could get points. That's a really easy tokenization process.
So are you going to be incentivizing people to stay healthy? Is that what you're saying?
You could.
Instead of incentivizing them for going to the hospital or seeing the doctor more frequently.
Right. The preventive care aspect.
So changing from a healthcare that's focused on treating sick people to a healthcare system that incentivizes people to stay healthy using tokens.
People have been trying to get patients to do preventive healthcare for as long as I've had a career. So let's assume that hospitals and insurance companies want people to stay healthy. It's a tough lift because people don't want to do what other people tell them to do, right? Exercise and eat right. Yeah, there are people who want to be healthy. But the administrative program is really hard. What if you could just check in your smartwatch and say, hey, smartwatch, here I am. You know, my my heart rate went up today. I had these I had these steps, right? Send a message to the internet, please. Don't tell anybody it was me, but it came from me because it's something I own, right? And give me tokens. Yeah, but the thing is, if you use this kind of new infrastructure, you don't have to find some central person to administer it. You don't have to hire people to call patients up afterwards, you know, the follow-ups, right? And say, hey, by the way, if you go to the gym 3 times a day, then 3 times a week, then you're going to get these points, and that's great for you because it lowers your health insurance. That's a lot of explaining. It's a huge amount of labor to contact patients. If you give them a device,
Yes,
and anybody can send in a message, that's called decentralized.
of course. And so Geeq is a public or private blockchain?
It's going for private first, which is allows the permissioning. And it's easier to build a blockchain that has the permissioning features in it and then let all the permissions go for public than it is to build a public blockchain and then try to retrofit permissions into it. So we're building the private blockchain with permissioning, and then you can just set all the permissions to 0 later if you want.
That's great. I like that. So just to take our minds off a little bit of a break for some of the viewers that aren't necessarily specifically into, healthcare. So what are other applications for blockchain that you see outside of healthcare?
Well,
your personal favorites, and some examples of that in the real world right now, if they exist, or if they don't. Even if they don't, you can tell us how you could implement them.
My personal favorite is going to maybe scare some people, but it's regulatory compliance. I was looking at the organic food chain, and I did it because I listened to something on NPR. And NPR was out visiting a farmer and talking about the entire list of criteria that you have to meet in order to be certified as an organic farm. The amount of labor it takes to meet all of those requirements, and then the amount of labor it takes to record all those requirements and keep those updated, it takes a huge amount of effort. And it's one of the reasons why organic is a little more expensive, right? With a private blockchain, you can keep your data shielded in the hospital, let's say, but you can make some data available to a blockchain that a regulatory agency can look at. And I'm really excited about that because I think there's going to be a role where we're going to need a lot of accountability for data, where the methods are transparent so you can count on them. Like hospital sends in data, it's recorded right away. They send data to this regulatory agency, might be encrypted so they can't see right away, but it's recorded right away. So you can't go back in time and say, hey, Mr. Smith really was taking 20 milligrams that day, right? Because it's right there in the blockchain. And then the regulatory agency can say, we really want to look at all the patients that have taken that particular drug. So give us permission to look at this one with that drug. And you keep all the rest of the drugs to yourself. All these psychiatric meds that are protected, you keep those to yourself. So now we have accountability for this drug that you can send to the regulatory agency and privacy for everyone else. That's a hybrid system that Geeq is working on. And imagine the frictions that removes, like car manufacturers. We've had all sorts of consortiums in various industries that say, let's get together and have a blockchain. And then they find out, oh, we don't really want to share all that information with our competitors.
Right?
Yeah. So we've spent billions of dollars, but we don't want to share that information. Meanwhile, the regulator is saying, but we kind of need emissions, right? And so there will be a place in the future, I'm sure, for blockchain to help with regulatory compliance that makes it much less painful for everybody involved and gives the right information.
Okay. So talk to me about track and trace. We talked about this before. What do you think about track and trace?
I think track and trace is a very good use for blockchain, especially if the track and trace is all digital. If it's track and trace chasing digital information. Perfect. Because it's just accounting.
Digital information.
Message coming in, figure out an unbiased way, put it there, track the transfers. Message comes in, transfer my data. Okay. Put it in the blockchain, update that the data has been transferred. Perfect. Perfect use case.
What do you mean? Just specifically, just like besides like healthcare, like tracking to the patient, like what do you, and tracing it to make sure that it gets to the appropriate doctor they're seeing or medical practitioner.
So there I'm thinking not about healthcare because they have enough to do, but I'm working with a partner called Robot, ROWBOT, and they have a lot of experience in financial institutions and banks. And I don't know if you've ever tried to get a loan or a mortgage, and then they make you do the same thing over and over.
A lot of documents.
And part of the problem, these colleagues tell me, is that it's because the data are siloed and the mortgage department doesn't have access to your banking records or your assets, or even maybe that you've passed this many credit checks. And so they have to do all these emails, right? And the concern is that the mortgage department has to abide by, like, if the wrong information gets out, then that's the head of the mortgage department head. And if the loan department or the credit score people, I'm not sure, I have friends who are experts, if their data are shared.
Credit score, not just, credit score, not social credit score, just correct. I mean, you didn't say, I'm just saying for the audience, we're not talking about social credit score. Credit score, go ahead.
We're not talking about social credit score, no.
Yeah.
We're talking about things in the bank which are very guarded, because if something goes wrong, that data owner would get in trouble. So there's very little sharing across silos. But if you could send a transaction in, a message with your enter keyboard that said, hey, I've asked for this piece of data, please give it to me. Then it gets updated and you've tracked and traced a piece of data through different hands. And that's called data lineage. And we can do that with health records too. And so that's a perfect use case because it's all electronic and it all needs a database that can't be faked.
So, Mike Reyes, I decided that I want to stay in Nebraska. Okay. My records are on the blockchain. I have to go to a new doctor and I have to go to a new dentist, a new physician. I'm generally healthy, I hope. We're about to find out. So how does Mike leverage the blockchain? Mike's data is on the blockchain so he can move his records from Rhode Island to Nebraska.
In this case, you would protect yourself by having your data encrypted in some way and having an ability to say who gets to see it. What happens after that is an entirely different story. But we're talking about getting settled in Nebraska. You would be the originator of saying to the blockchain, hey, I want my data transferred from here to here. Just like coins. Hey, I want my crypto account to send Bitcoin from here to here. Same kind of operation from the computer's point of view, mostly. So now we can say, the new hospital can say, hey, we have this data. This guy shows up. He's named Mike Reyes. Do we have the right data? Hey, Mike Reyes, can you prove that the data that came from you? And you would say, sure. And they'd say, and then you'd prove it in some way that you're the one who transferred it from here to here.
I like that. Because I've lived like in 5 different states. I don't even live in different countries, but that's a region that's different. I can't transfer data from here to China, or something like that. I lived in China for 10 years. I was an educator. But so I have to ask this because I have to always ask. Before we get back to healthcare, we will round up with healthcare again later. What are your top 5 favorite coins or tokens and why, personally? Because we're all in the same space. We got to ask that.
So Geeq has its own ERC20 token. Have to admit that. And that's my favorite. And
is it traded anywhere? Can I buy some?
We're listed on KuCoin, which is a major exchange.
Big.
And it's your decision.
It's not financial advice. It's not financial advice. I get it.
Not pushing it. I want to talk about blockchain here. And I'm not going to say anything about other crypto.
What was the moment that you basically woke up one day and were like, you know what? I like blockchain. I'm gonna start Geeq. If it helps, I can give you a quick rundown on me.
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, so OneCoin. OneCoin, right, in Hong Kong? The one that was a big scam. OneCoin was a big scam. It was like they had a CEO that spoke like several languages. One day, all the money just disappeared. That happened in Hong Kong when I was living there in 2013, 14. So I hated cryptocurrency. I came back to the States and my brother was like, Bitcoin, this, Bitcoin. I was like, dude, that's all a scam. That's not, you're losing your money. You're wasting your time. 2017. 2019, I'm back in New York City. I'm taking the subway. So I see Gemini. I revolution these rules. I started doing research on Gemini. They're like working with the government regulators. And I was like, I'm going in now. I started buying that's when I said, I'm going in. This is for real. This is not going to be what happened in Hong Kong with OneCoin. And that was after like the big, also 2017, 2018 was a big jump and then the big crash. But that's when I started getting in. And a few months later, I was like, you know what? The current administration, this is 2019, 2020, is doing with Obamacare. So this would be a great way to help people, pay for their healthcare records, using cryptocurrency. So I went to a few different organizations to network. I went to NYU. A professor said, Mike, I like what you're doing. I had like a little 5-page deck. He's like, but that's not a really good idea. Let's have some coffee. It was Friday. Monday morning, let's have some coffee near NYU. He sat me down. He's like, Mike, you work in politics, right? Lobbying government. I was like, yeah. Why don't you do this? Why don't you go to Rhode Island and talk to the government there and talk to different governments around the country and work with them on helping develop a state central database healthcare system where they can have general anonymized access of people's healthcare data. So they can see what policies they pass in different regions. And people can have 24/7 access to their healthcare records using the blockchain. You're going to incorporate a B Corp. He was like telling me what to do. And I was like, yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm taking down those. And these are the next steps. But that's how I got in. So Stephanie?
And you're still doing it. That's good for you. I think that what we have in common is a drive to make technology accessible to everyone. I spent my time before blockchain studying healthcare outcomes for people with chronic illness and the effects on them and their families. So a lot of people forget about the effects that happen when you have caregivers or younger siblings, so that's what I cared about. And then I got into disability policy. And again, you have to think about the whole unit. So, these things and mental health is another passion of mine. So these things made me really sensitive to the idea that our systems have to be able to be robust enough to do for everyone. And I looked at what blockchain could do. It's decentralized. Anybody could send some data in and be taken care of in a neutral way. That is revolutionary. Just that concept by itself. You could be homebound, you could be bedridden, you could have zero time because you have no childcare, right? All these things that are barriers to healthcare are barriers to getting stuff done. And
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And if we could use blockchain technology to make it accessible and easy to use to take care of data stuff, people already bank online with their phones. Why can't we do all kinds of other things? So that's really what got me into it. Number one, accessibility. And number two was the accountability. I think that the whole previous tech movement of let's pretend things are free, but you're the product, that people figure out later when it's too late.
When they're hooked.
When they're hooked. and they've shared their data and they've given their lives away. And everybody has a profile on them that they didn't know was being constructed. I remember hearing a story, and I think this is known now, but I heard a long time ago that Facebook knew when you were about to break up before you did. What Facebook does is it tracks who you let know what. And they know your friend group. And if your friend group, if one person in your friend group who might be, you're figuring it out, who might be your significant other, starts not interacting with you so much, or your friend group, and starts interacting with these people, they see that before you even know you've grown distant.
Well, I mean, the good thing is this. I mean, for their aspect, I would think that they would be like, okay, great. So let's start promoting flowers for this guy if the girlfriend's going to leave him pretty soon.
Right.
For Facebook, it's a good thing, I guess.
Right. For Facebook, it's a good thing. For the lawyers who are divorce lawyers who, get their ads promoted, it's a good thing. That is so intrusive. So there needs to be accountability, and that's the end of that.